to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too.
Yeah.
Will you, Renee, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yes, yeah, and I wanted to double check, is yours Mika or Micah?
Micah.
Micah. Okay, sounds good. That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure.
And what are your pronouns?
My pronouns are she, her, and how about yourself?
They. I prefer they.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Where are you coming from today?
I am on Ohlone land in Oakland, otherwise
Okay.
known as Oakland, California,
Okay.
East Bay. And you are in Canada, right? In
I'm
Vancouver?
Vancouver, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh unceded territories because we stole their land. So, so that's where I am. So yeah, we're both on the West Coast. It looks like.
Yeah, and I was looking last night at your other like social media presence, looking at some of your like circus acrobatic stuff. It's quite
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, when you were like, "Oh, I didn't know you do handstand training," and then I was like, "I'm pretty sure I didn't put handstand in my Google Calendar because I usually abbreviate everything." And then I looked and I'm like, "Oh, they must." That's why when you're like, "Oh, my partner is an ex acrobat," like that makes sense. So they know HS stands for handstands.
Yeah, literally, I was like, HS training could be something else, but who knows?
Yeah, yeah, it was handstands.
Yeah.
So,
But it doesn't seem like you're retired. I like looked at some of your posts. It looks like you're still performing.
I last performed in September, so I've only been tattooing. I'm very new at tattooing, and I've been wanting to do it for several years now. So this was kind of me putting circus kind of on the shelf just so that I can actually pursue art and tattooing with a little bit more gusto because it's something that's always been kind of just at the side of my desk. I draw for more therapeutic purposes, and then now this year is the first year I'm actually trying to be a little bit more full ham about it.
So I also read that you're transitioning to being a therapist.
Yes, yeah.
And so you went from being an acrobat to being a tattoo artist. You're going to be a therapist soon.
Yeah, that's the plan. Although I'm taking a university course right now in therapy or in psychology, and I'm just testing out the institution just to see whether or not it's kind of the right vibes. I think for therapeutic tattooing, I don't need to be a licensed therapist just for the individuals that I'm looking to work with and then how I'm looking to work with them. And yeah, it's just institutions and especially the way that they're teaching psychology. There's a lot of like Western focused and a lot of colonial aspects to it that I'm not super in line with. So I'm looking at also just doing crisis center training, which is about 6 months for the training alone. And they really arm you with a lot of skills to be able to work with people in need and in crises as well. So I'm looking at that because that might be something that's a little bit more aligned with the purpose of why I want to pursue this education.
So you want to tattoo therapeutically, like as what you do. Like tattooing isn't going to be like an occasional thing. It's like how you want to build your practice.
It's how I want to build my practice. Yeah, just as someone, I am a trauma survivor myself. I know that being able to access different types of services has been really integral to my own healing journey. So I want to be able to kind of just give that back to the world, just because it's just kind of something I was thinking about in terms of my own career transition, because I also work in the technology sector as a designer. And it just kind of came to this point where the thing I want to walk away with the most is how I made people feel and the impact that I was able to leave in their lives and then be able to be part of their healing journey. So in therapeutic tattooing, what I want to be able to do is obviously provide safe spaces, but then also be able to provide any kind of cognitive and dialectical behavior therapy, somatic therapy in the actual experience as well, as much as going to be available. Just because I know with the tattoo experience, it's not the same as when you actually have a relationship with a therapist where you're going to them repeatedly and being able to deconstruct certain experiences that you're processing. So I know that the practice is going to be a little bit different. With that said, I do think that there's space for that because, as you are probably well aware, a lot of folks will often treat tattoo sessions as therapy. And I don't always think that's necessarily fair for a tattoo artist because they may or may not have the emotional capacity to be able to receive what a client might be giving to them. And they may also not have the skill set to be able to respond effectively as well. So I do see a gap in the industry. And I think a lot of other industries also experience this. So hairstylists as well as bartenders, they often also do a lot of emotional labor for folks.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like that's what we get paid for first and foremost. But I definitely seen on folks like I've seen people invite, backstory for tattoos, including trauma. And I've also seen people say, like, please don't give me the details. Like, I just want to know what you want.
Exactly.
That's all I really want to know at this point. So, yeah, it is interesting to see how people approach it. And I don't know if you I had a couple episodes. It sounds like you found me through, like, my website more than the
I did,
podcast.
yeah.
But I did two sessions, like 2 podcast episodes with Sarah, who is Medicine Sarah. She's a trauma-informed tattoo artist in Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah, another state of the United States, and she spoke a lot about that and how she came to it from being a caseworker and working with a lot of houseless populations. And it's really cool to see people kind of change careers and go into it from perspective of, like, not from art being the first kind of seed of it, but from loving humanity, wanting to help humanity as the initial piece of it. Because when I entered the industry in 2008, it was very much like you have to be an artist. And as somebody like not trained, I don't have formal art training. I was like, can I do this? Are people gonna like what I do? And then of course, found that people saw my value, like, as a conversationalist, as a supporter, as somebody in their corner, like part of their sort of healing team, and that's kind of how I built my career for the last 16 years.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with tattooing, is that so much of it is about the actual experience itself as well, not just the actual art. And obviously the art is part of it, but if you, it's almost like dating. I feel like if you don't really vibe well with your tattoo artist, you may walk away from the experience not feeling necessarily very great. And worse, some folks are actually traumatized in their tattoo experiences with the kind of relationship dynamic that may exist between a client and a tattoo artist. And that's something I don't know. I would never want to accidentally do that. So I do think that there's a lot of space for folks to be able to be a bit more mindful about it. And I don't know, like, the industry is just so interesting because it is so diverse, especially across the world as well. And there's been so many kind of evolutions of it. And I'm loving the evolution that I'm seeing now with a lot of, like, queer and, like, femmes in the space more than what has traditionally been there, at least in the westernized nations. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I only am familiar with what's here for the most part. And,
right.
But there was this sort of shift in maybe 2012 when I started seeing there was a blog called Tatrix, and the person running it would put out, like, really cool, very innovative, very different looking art from tattoo artists from all over the world, mostly not from the United States.
Right.
And it kind of gave me this sort of like, oh, like, yeah, we're doing things differently now because there's more different kinds of people in the industry, and we're more attentive to the client as a human, as a whole person, not just like as a piece of skin with a wallet attached to it.
Yeah.
And people starting to do other kinds of art, dot work, block work, like really large scale stuff, the stuff that looked like scribble, like just trying out different things as styles. Because when I was first coming in, it was all like Americana type of tattooing.
Right. Yeah. I guess you've been in the industry for, one might say, a hot minute.
It's been a minute. Yeah.
It's
cool. It's like my longest relationship of my life. Yeah. It's cool. It's cool to be kind of at this stage and be like, oh, because for the longest time I was like, I feel like a baby, and I still feel, like there's a lot to learn, but I'm starting to feel a bit more like, okay, I kind of know what I'm talking about. After like 16 years, I'm starting to feel that way.
So I can look forward to entering the same space in 16 years myself.
Yeah. Well, I'm so curious how, in your, how you view the building of the type of business you're talking about. Like, so I was married to a therapist, and he was just starting his practice at the time when we were together. And so we had this idea, where we're like, what if we get the same building, and, like, you'll have your office.
Right.
And you will work with somebody, for a certain amount of time. And then, you come up with an image, and, like, then bring me in to the, to the sessions as, like, part of the whole package, sort of the work that you're doing with that person, that piece of their healing. And then I do the tattoo on that person, like, we kind of like work as a team, as a therapist and tattoo artist team. It was a cool idea, you know. I don't think it's not a good idea. It was just for us that wasn't the path forward. But you're like, you wanting to do that as one person, that's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot, and I think it's I also have an interest in somatic therapy, and I have Chinese heritage, so traditional Chinese medicine isn't something that I particularly am well educated about because it is its own branch of medicine that requires a lot of training, but it did grow up around traditional Chinese medicine. It is something that my family does practice. There are a lot of overlaps with somatics around traditional Chinese medicine, and that is something that was interesting to me, is because tattooing itself is a somatic experience, and it can be a somatic experience that can be quite dysregulating, and I believe that there's ways that we can actually be able to integrate that somatics and then be able to calm the nervous system down as well, so it doesn't feel as dysregulating. And if you know anything about traditional Chinese medicine, a lot of it comes down to meridians and how energy moves through your body. So I am hoping to be able to learn a little bit more about it in addition to more classical Western psychology, just so that I can kind of blend everything together. Because that's just it. It's like no one type of modality when it comes to any kind of therapeutic practice is going to be right for every single individual. So having kind of a toolbox of modalities at my disposal, I think, is going to be a good path. And I may not be necessarily a master in all of them, but at least I can provide a little bit of it. So I'm still in very early stages. So right now I'm still trying to get my technique down pat.
Are you connecting it also to like acupressure or acupuncture too, like where in the body and how it relates to the organs? Okay.
Yeah, I would want to do that. So even if it's something where you may not necessarily be getting an image, but it might be a series of dots, for example, along certain meridians where we know that there might be some energy shifts that need to happen. And it might be something that's, because tattoos are permanent unless you do get it covered up or lasered, that is something that I do want to do a little bit more research in. So that's why I feel a little bit more comfortable with providing somatics in terms of helping people through different breath work, providing a bit of talk therapy, just being able to hold a safe space for them as I kind of understand a little bit more about what is the reality of TCM with tattooing. Because with acupuncture, while it does work with meridians and you are puncturing the skin, it is not something that's permanent. So I do think a little bit more research and patience needs to be involved in that, because it's kind of new territory.
Yeah, I took a course in past life regression hypnosis last year, and so I've been thinking about how to integrate it into my practice more.
It would be really cool.
Right, because people, I mean, I have also feel like I've seen, you know, over this many years, like kind of you see different things happen in sessions, right? Like people might spend the whole session crying, and it's very intentional. Like they come in and they say, this is what I need to do. Okay, give you full permission. Like I will not stop to check on you unless you need me to, you know, unless you want to stop. Like I will just let you do your thing and I'll keep tattooing you, right? Like having intentions be set for that at first, the communication happen. And I've seen people's like passed away, sort of the, you know, the spirits of their passed away people stand over them. I've like, you know, I've had a lot of different experiences in different ways, kind of on different planes.
Yeah, it must feel really powerful to be able to experience that.
Yeah. And I mean, I love you coming into this with all these modalities. How did you come to tattooing in the first place? Like, what was your history with tattooing?
My history with tattooing is actually, it was a bit organic. So I have been an artist for a while. So I studied graphic design when I went back to school, and I was introduced to drawing as just something that we had to do, but it's not anything I actually pursued when I was in graphic design. I pursued more classical, like graphic design branding, as well as data visualization. And then unfortunately, there were some challenging things that happened in my life when I finished school, and drawing became more of a meditative practice for me. So initially it just came to be as more of a fun thing that I would do on the side. And then it deeply became something that it was the only way I actually knew how to express kind of my internal experience. And, you know, I don't know if you had a chance to look at some of my art, but
I did.
So it's a lot of them are self-portraits of myself. And it's just like the way I drew wasn't necessarily something that was particularly technically advanced, just because it wasn't something that I focused on a lot. So my drawings were very primitive at the beginning, but because of that, they were just very simple line work. And I had a lot of folks actually ask me to design tattoos for them once I started releasing that work. And that was just kind of my introduction into the tattoo world, where I was asked to design tattoos. People would often tell me that my work looked very tattooable. And then I had a tattoo from many, many years ago, and then I got it covered up because it was associated with some bad experiences that I had in my life. So that was kind of my first experience of having a more of a therapeutic experience, of having something that was deeply traumatizing, and then actually have somebody who to this day is still one of my current tattoo artists and has been a mentor to me throughout my career progression so far, and having someone who is able to hold me in a safe space and actually do the physical act of covering this tattoo was very therapeutic to me. And then after that, I began to just start to get more tattoos and kind of just fell in love with getting tattoos, and then also fell in love with drawing and what it meant for me. So it was only kind of a matter of time when the two sort of coalesced together. And it was about 2 years ago when I really started to think more seriously about it. And then it's only in the last year I really started to pursue it a bit more seriously.
And are you, I know you said you have a mentor, but are you in a studio with other artists? Do you have a formal apprenticeship, or how are you doing it?
Mm-hmm. I had a formal apprenticeship, and then I left it to just open a private studio with my friend, just because I do want to be able to provide people with therapeutic experiences. I know that sometimes folks are going to come in with some deeply vulnerable things that they're going to want to talk about. And in the studio that I was in before, there were 10 artists, and it was a very small studio, so there wasn't always the privacy that I felt that the clients that I was bringing in needed. So I got a private studio, which is actually only about 3 blocks away from my old studio. So I still go there a lot, and I still just kind of collect a lot of mentors along the way and ask questions. I'm going to go shadow a tattoo artist next week, and just kind of watch her work. And then she's going to watch me tattoo as well. So I'm still very much in the learning processes. And I think it's, I had a couple of not pleasant experiences in that 2-year trajectory of looking to learn and get into the industry. And because of that, I've been really hesitant of formal apprenticeships, just because of the bad experiences that I've had. So what I've been doing is just kind of reaching out to people who I trust in the industry and learning from them, and then just trying to be reciprocal as much as possible in the effort that they're giving me as well.
I mean, if you are willing to talk about those not good experiences, I feel like I get approached a lot by tattoo artists who are starting out and who are just cold calling, right? And they're saying are you available for an apprenticeship? And I don't know them, never met them, right? And I usually respond and I say, this is not the way to do it. You're going to end up in some bad space. Someone's going to take advantage of you. You need to go meet people. You need to approach people you know.
Yeah.
And I feel like I say this over and over again, and I feel like people listen sometimes to this podcast who are starting out. So I don't know, if you are willing to talk more about your bad experiences trying to learn.
Absolutely.
Formally.
Yeah, so I actually, when I was starting to want to learn, I was working full-time in the tech industry. And when I started to do a lot of research on apprenticeships and just trying to understand how you might be able to get one. And I also talked to my mentor, who is one of the first people who tattooed me and covered up that tattoo. And he did a formal apprenticeship, and he very much has an attitude of, you don't need to do this, because his apprenticeship, he didn't have a great experience in it either. And he's since become a very successful, wildly talented tattoo artist as well. And for me, I just wasn't in a place to be able to not work and have to be able to go to a tattoo studio and not being paid. It wasn't a place that was viable for me. I was dealing with a lot of mental health issues. It was just really important for me to be able to kind of meet my baseline of needs so that I could shelter myself, feed myself, and then also afford mental health services. So that was kind of my top priority. So then what I had done is I actually did some research on just courses, because I also have a lot of strong feelings around apprenticeships and just kind of the internship model that happens to exist in many different industries, not just tattoos as well, where it does provide an access issue, or it presents an access issue for people, where it's kind of folks who are able to afford an apprenticeship, and then they're able to kind of enter the industry. And if you can't afford an apprenticeship, then you either don't get one, or you're going to live a life where you're really suffering for several years and just trying to make ends meet, and really burning yourself out of going to, every day to a studio learning, but then also trying to work an actual job as well so you can make ends meet. And I just don't think that anybody should ever have to suffer like that. Like, we don't need to be working 50, 60-hour weeks. That's not a life that anybody should be living, and I really deeply believe that. So I took a course, which ended up being a bit of a scam, and I am always, I'm not ungrateful for the experience, because I do think through every experience we do learn. So I deeply learned who I don't want to be in that experience.
Was the scammy part just like the difference of values, or was it literally like you didn't get the kind of learning that you paid for?
It was a little bit of both. So I think that some folks may have gotten the learning that they were looking for. I think for myself I'm the kind of person who I take a little bit longer to learn. I need a little bit more hands-on experience. I'm not someone who just is a theoretical learner. I need to do it in order to learn it. And I just felt like, it was a lot of, we were tattooing skin very quickly. I didn't feel comfortable doing it, nor was I being overseen when I was tattooing skin either. And the individual who was running this course would just kind of go off and be like, I got this gig and I have to go and do this gig. And that didn't feel good for me, just because I am a mentor in the design industry. I've mentored designers through different phases of their career, and I'm a very involved mentor. And I think when you make the choice to be a mentor, you have to be willing to accept the work that comes with it as well. And, that's why, some mentorships, they do get paid. I get paid as a mentor in the design industry because it is time, it is my expertise. And for that reason, I am also going to show up as best as I can because I am being paid for it. So there was a bit of a value misalignment there, where in this course, I am paying money, so I do expect somebody to be there, because there is a bit of transaction going on there. Whereas more informal apprenticeships where you're not being paid, I understand. That's why, you're asking a lot for somebody for their time, their expertise, and you have to ask the question of what are they getting back from it as well. So that's why I'm like, I have a lot of attitudes around the apprenticeship model where there's a lot of inherent issues for all parties involved, and I do think that there are different ways that we could be approaching it. But that course ended up not being great, and
it was in person or online?
It was in person, and I was introduced to a studio setting where I was able to deeply learn this is the kind of studio that I wouldn't want to be a part of. So there was an incident that happened where I actually had to call the police on the shop owner on the very last day of class, because someone had come into the shop and it was very clear that they were on some sort of substance, but they weren't being aggressive. And I think with proper conflict resolution skills and de-escalation skills, the situation would have been able to be managed in a peaceful manner, but instead it escalated quite rapidly and culminated in the shop owner just beating the shit out of this guy in the parking lot, which was very alarming for me to see. So I actually ended up having to call the cops to be able to make sure that this person didn't die, essentially.
I'm so sorry. That sounds so dramatic.
Yeah, so after that, I have a lot of hesitations of certain shops and certain personas as well, and I hate that that's kind of the experience that I walked away from, because I do think that everybody deserves a chance. Nobody deserves any kind of quick judgments, and just because someone may physically look like a kind of persona that you have a mental model of, it may not necessarily mean that that's the truth. But that is sort of something that I walked away with, and I have to learn to kind of deconstruct it. Mm-hmm.
I've entirely avoided men's shops in my career. I was able to be in women-owned shops my whole life, and now I have this privacy.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I felt so lucky about it. Like there were definitely like dudes here and there, part of the shops, like some, kind of being artists in these shops.
Yeah.
But it was so the structure of like how power went. And it wasn't always amazing either, you know, like there were also shit that happened, like I got a knife pulled on me by a woman tattoo artist in my first shop. You know, like shit, like people are still kind of rough and tumble and rough on the edges and sometimes aggressive, and like it's old school, like the old school tattoo culture is very intense. You know.
Which I find very interesting as well, because tattooing has a long history that predates it being an industry at all. And I find it kind of, I almost find it interesting that there is this old school, very male-dominated thought process around tattooing, which is also a very westernized approach to it as well. Whereas tattooing has existed in many tribal cultures for time immemorial as an essential part of how they're able to express the types of communities that they come from.
Yeah, I mean, it's its own thing here, right? Like, and then people like to fetishize and romanticize sort of the quote-unquote tribal styles of tattooing and appropriate them.
Yeah.
So, you know, now we've gotten to the topic that we originally wanted to.
Yes.
I wanted to talk about and, you know, put more out there about this topic, and I think people are more and more interested in learning what is cultural appropriation, how do I avoid it. You know, what's appreciation versus appropriation? Why is it bad? You know, all of these questions. And, you know, you can't really download that information to someone's brain in one conversation who doesn't really understand. But people don't think about how our world and the colonization of our world has become, you know, has made every other culture like up for grabs and up for being appropriated, and why that's not okay. Can you speak to that, like being, I don't know, from whatever angle you'd like to?
Yeah, I guess for me, it's cultural appropriation is something when I was in design school that we actually talked about a lot. And I think it was something that people were always very cognizant of and being very careful of not to culturally appropriate. At the time when I was studying, the Day of the Dead aesthetic was something that became quite popularized in graphic design, and it became a subject of conversation of, hey, if you actually don't come from this culture, you have to ask yourself whether or not it's appropriate to use the motifs that are coming from the Day of the Dead, and if you even understand the significance of the motifs as well. So it was a bit of it was almost unusual when I entered into the tattoo industry and started to have an interest in it, where I see these two pathways happening in the world, where we do have a lot of conversations and a lot of folks who are very, very, very observant to not culturally appropriate. They're having the conversations, they're being a little bit more mindful about how they're displaying their work. And then the tattoo industry, where it almost seems very rampant and there's not as much discourse happening around it. And it's almost like this dissonance of not understanding like why that's happening. And that's kind of a conversation piece of, you know, can we make change? Can we start to have the discourse? How do we start to have the discourse as well? You had mentioned something around what is cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. And that's something that I think is just, if we have more discourse around it, then I think we'll be able to start to build some community practices and standards of what is going to be appreciative versus appropriation. So I think about Irizumi, for example, where like as an Asian tattoo artist, I do have people coming to me sometimes asking if I do Asian style tattoos, and I do, but I'm very specific about wanting to make sure that I'm only doing tattoos that are specific to my Chinese heritage, as opposed to something that actually belongs to, say, the Japanese culture. And I think Irizumi is an interesting one, because when I was doing a bit of research on Irizumi, what I understood is that it was a dying art form in Japan because of a lot of the stigmas that come with it. So a lot of the Irizumi masters, they were getting older and they wanted to be able to pass on their practice. So they actually began to go worldwide to be able to teach folks outside of Japan how to continue to keep this culture and practice alive. So for that one, where
can you define it? I'm not exactly sure of what it is, and also for listeners, can you define Irizumi?
Irizumi is the Japanese, like the full, like a lot of motifs, very full body suits. It is like very much tied to like the Yakuza culture in Japan as well. So there's still a lot of stigmas that exist around it. Stigma around tattooing still really deeply exists in Asia as well. I can't speak specifically for Japanese culture as a non-Japanese person, but just as an Asian person, just generally, I do understand that there are still some stigmas that do exist. as I understand, and this is just kind of from cursory research, is a lot of Irizumi masters, because they wanted to make sure that their art practice lives on, and because of the stigmas that they were experiencing in Japan, they actually went worldwide to be able to teach other people the style of Irizumi tattooing. So with that one, I do think that there's a little bit more leniency of folks who are not Japanese practicing an Irizumi, because Irizumi masters themselves, they decided to go abroad and then share that art form and then share the skill and practice as well. So, but for me, as an Asian artist, I feel like there's enough cultural motifs in my own culture that I don't need to borrow from another culture. And I always find that kind of interesting, because I have a friend who she's of European descent, and she'd been wanting a dragon tattoo and was feeling really conflicted about getting a dragon tattoo, because a lot of the dragon tattoos that do exist out there are very Oriental inspired. But then she started doing research on her own heritage and dragons within her own heritage, and was able to understand there's a deep mythology of dragons within her own culture. Mm-hmm. So why not just do the research to understand a little bit more about the motifs that are specific to your culture, and then be able to kind of build a tattoo design around that. So I do think that there's space for artists to just really deeply understand, like, what culture do I come from? What is important to me, as opposed to actually borrowing from other cultures.
Do you, when you sort of make decisions around, like, what will I tattoo, what will I not tattoo, mm-hmm. and say it has to do with another culture that you're, not Chinese culture, but another mm-hmm. type of culture, do you think about the power dynamics of kind of like world powers? Because, like, as you said, Irizumi, Japanese style tattooing, it's more widespread, it's more kind of like considered okay to borrow from in a lot of tattoo culture, versus I think people understand that, like, African symbolism is so specific, right? Where mm-hmm. Japanese tattoos are sort of part of the mainstream tattoo culture. Yeah. And then when it kind of comes down to that, I mean, I agree with you, like, around dragons. If a white person was a dragon, we're looking at European dragons. We're not looking at Chinese dragons. Mm-hmm. But in sort of the sense of, like, people want koi fish, or they want, wind bars, or they want maple leaves or whatever. And I'm kind of like, well, yes, there's racism, towards people of color across the board, but, like, the Japanese are also oppressors, and also, like, other cultures. I'm from Russia. I'm a Russian Jew, mm-hmm. Which actually means that I wasn't treated as a white person when I was growing up. But if people want, like, Russian prison tattoos, I don't fucking care, But if they want, I don't know, something more specific, or, like, say, Hebrew, something, where it's more specific and the people are smaller and more oppressed, mm-hmm. like, yeah, no, like, not if you're not of this, if you don't have roots in this culture. Like, yeah. Do you make those distinctions, or are you just like, okay, if you're white, you, like, stick with European tattoos?
I don't really, it's nuance, I suppose, is the answer. Yeah. Is, like, for myself as an artist, there are certain things that I'm not going to tattoo, where, as much as I love, I'm trying to remember the style name. It's at the tip of my tongue. It's like the American Mexican style. It's very popular, specifically in like American Mexican culture.
You're talking about, like, kind of West Coast, like, black and gray
yes.
kind of stuff?
Yeah.
It's like it was born in West Coast prisons, I think.
Okay,
is what you're talking about. There's, like, clowns and, like,
clowns. A lot of cursive text. There's a specific name for the style. It's just at the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, we'll figure it out, and I'll make a note later.
Yeah, I'll probably wake up at midnight and just shoot outside.
Like, text me, please.
Yeah. It'll be one of those 3 a.m. things, be like, I remembered. But I love the style. The aesthetic is really beautiful, but that culture isn't mine. So for myself, mm-hmm. it's like, I would never feel comfortable tattooing it, just because I don't deeply understand what it is like to live as a Mexican American. Mm-hmm. Same with, in Canada, we have a lot of issues with just how Indigenous people have been classically oppressed and are still experiencing a lot of oppression as well. And it's like, if somebody were to ask me to tattoo something that was specifically Indigenous or Indigenous inspired, my first answer would just be, I would love to help you find an Indigenous artist that is going to be a really well-oriented artist to to do this work for you, just because those artists are going to exist, one, and two, that's not the lived experience that I have. The only things that I feel comfortable tattooing are, you know, things that have really not much cultural relevance, or something that comes from my own culture, because those are my lived experiences. I think the question of somebody who's receiving a tattoo, that becomes kind of a personal conversation that you need to have for yourself. So for example, I actually had a friend who asked me to tattoo something that was Indigenous inspired, because she had spent a lot of time in the Yukon territories and has a lot of deep lived experiences with Indigenous communities. So for her, it has a lot of personal relevance. So I understand that it is her own choice to tattoo something that is Indigenous inspired, even though she herself is not Indigenous. She did have conversations with her own Indigenous community, be like, is this okay? People gave her the thumbs up. And I think that's, you know, that's really great that she was able to do that work. And then when she asked me, I put my boundary and said, I really love that this is really meaningful for you, and that you've done the work to be able to understand whether or not it is appreciation or appropriation, because it is going to always be a personal experience for other people. But I just kind of told her, this is my boundary, and I will be happy to refer you to other Indigenous artists. So I think that's just it. Like, as an artist, I think there's more of a moral responsibility to understand what is appropriation, what is appreciation, and then as an individual who's receiving a tattoo, that's going to be a bit more of a nuanced conversation, and something that you deeply have to have with yourself, because, you know, we don't know, like, someone may have grown up in a culture where they may not physically look like it, but they deeply identify with it, and in that case, it might be just appreciation as opposed to appropriation.
Yeah, you know, I think it's always like a question. You know, I did a dream catcher on a white woman because when she came to me and asked me for it, she said, I grew up in New Mexico and there was a dream catcher hanging over my bed when I was a kid, and I feel like it's a symbol of safety for me. And I said, okay, and I will do this for you. And I don't think I've done one since, you know, because of course it's an Indigenous symbol here of folks from the lands where New Mexico is now. And yeah, so I'm like, it sort of was like one of those moments where I was like, yeah, I mean, I guess I get, like, I'll say yes because you're giving me like a good explanation, but it felt super odd to be the person to like decide, you know. And in general, I guess I don't know enough tattooers. I know, you know, like, to refer people specifically to say, like, you want Indigenous themed tattoo, you should go to this Indigenous artist. And I also, because of the kind of first topic we touched upon of like how people feel safe or not safe with people, when they've come to me, I trust that I'm the person that's meant to do their piece.
Right.
That's not always true, you know, but for the most part, it's felt like, okay, you chose me. I feel good about you. Like, this is the connection that we have. You've established that. I don't want to pass you on. I don't want to make you feel like, you know, like, I don't want this. Go on, like, kind of hot potato, you know?
Right.
So I've generally was on the side of, like, if people wanted something I wasn't comfortable doing, I would say, I'm comfortable tattooing you. I'm not comfortable doing this piece on you. Like, can we change it in some way that will make us both comfortable? Or is there a different piece you'd like to get from me? But kind of like honoring them having found me specifically and the connection that we made specifically as kind of first, and then the thing they want as a second, and then or, you know, or saying like, I would love to tattoo you. Here's some ideas I have for where where you're at. This specifically cultural piece that you want, isn't it? You know, like, so yeah, so like, not, I veer on the side of not passing people on, because I've also seen how hurt people get when you try to pass them on. You know,
absolutely. Yeah.
And they will like write you off forever. They'll be like, you rejected me, I reject you. It's interesting. People take things like that very personally.
Right. I guess you've had a lot more experience in the industry as well, so I think maybe I just haven't encountered that quite yet because I'm still very new in the experience. But I think it comes down to it's always going to be a nuanced conversation, and I think that's the key thing, is that there needs to be a conversation that's had. There needs to be a conversation between the individuals involved, the potential communities involved, as well as a conversation that you have with yourself. So I think even, you know, as tattoo artists, we have to have conversations with ourselves of what are we comfortable tattooing and why? And then are you comfortable to have that conversation with a client and assert your boundary, and then be able to establish what are some other potential solutions that we can have? And then as somebody who might be receiving tattoos, asking yourself the question of, why am I getting this tattoo? Is it just because I think it looks cool? Or is there actually deep significance to it? And then how does it impact the communities where the symbology and the motifs may actually belong to? And I think it becomes difficult because, you know, this isn't, getting a tattoo is usually deeply personal for somebody. It's not wearing a headdress at Coachella where it's very clear to be able to identify that as this is behavior that is appropriative. So I think that's just it, is within this industry, we just need to start to have more discourse around it. And I don't necessarily think that that's happening.
Yes, not enough. I was gonna bring in, so I did a piece on a woman's hand. It's a blue piece from a Russian style of pottery. It's called gzhel, and it's, you know, I'm sure borrowed from the Dutch and also from Chinese. There's blue painting in Chinese culture and also in Dutch culture, and I'm sure others as well. But I posted that reel and it went viral. It was really the only piece of mine that ever had go viral on TikTok specifically, and it got, by now I don't know how many, but like 6 million views at the last time I looked. And of course the comments were like, well, this isn't yours to do because it's not actually Russian, it's actually Chinese, or it's actually Dutch. And I also so it's a Russian, both the client and I are of Russian descent, Russian Jewish descent. She wanted specifically, you know, for that reason, and you know, I was a good fit for that, right? Like it was a good fit. And then the song I used for the reel was by a Ukrainian artist, and this was right before Russia attacked Ukraine, and the woman who sings the song that I put on the reel has since stopped speaking Russian, singing in Russian. She only speaks and sings in Ukrainian, and has completely like separated herself from Russia in all the ways. The song, however, is in Russian. And so the comments I was getting were like, you put the song on there, how dare you? She's a Ukrainian, you know, artist and singer, and this is a Russian tattoo. Like, how dare you do that? And then like the style, it's not actually Russian, it's Chinese, or it's this, it's that. And I was like, okay, like being viral is interesting because people have all kinds of opinions, right? And everyone is correct, right? Like everyone who was saying something was correct, but also like I have a perspective of how appropriate it was to do the tattoo on this person, me the person who does it, and then the song I chose, I like the song. And, you know, this was before the war started in Ukraine, but also this woman built her entire career on Russian listeners and from Russian money. So also at the time I was like, yeah, there's no problem with her singing the song. And anyway, it's just been such an interesting thing to culturally be like specifically placing myself in online, especially, you know, where people just throw things at you.
I think that's the thing. It's like context matters, and context matters because it's able to show the nuance where, you know, had the war started before you posted that, you may have made a very different decision of the choice of music, but you posted it beforehand. So it's kind of, you know, a lot of times in online spaces is everyone's moving really quickly in online spaces. We're not necessarily stopping to critically assess what is the context that's actually happening here. And I think that's just, it comes down to like, we have to be able to have discourse, and it's tough to be online just because it does open you up to a lot of criticism. Even when we try our best to show up as compassionate, as informed, we're always going to make mistakes, and we're always going to be, you know, open for any kind of critical analysis. I think that's just kind of the reality. And I'm sorry that happened to you, because that's also tough, because it can feel very challenging to know that you're doing your best as a human being and then receive a lot of criticism as well. So I'm sorry that happened to you. And I think it's just, you know, we all just have to kind of take a moment and just believe that most people in this world, we're doing our best. That is, I think, the baseline. Most people in the world.
It's so hard to believe that, you know, especially right now in the United States.
Yes, absolutely.
And to remember that. I mean, I try. I'm like a pretty judgy person, you know, like there's a lot of things that I right away go like, you know, or like even, or people, like whole groups of people, like white men, like I'm like, fuck off. I don't want to be around you. Don't come near me. Yeah.
I try as well. It's what's really helped me is Buddhism, and the concept of reincarnation has really helped me to find more compassion for myself and others as well, just because, you know, the concept of reincarnation is that we are constantly just recycling new life phases until we become the best version of ourselves. So when we interact with somebody who is not necessarily always showing up well, the takeaway that I always have is maybe they're just in life phase 10 and I'm in life phase 40. So there's just a very different set of experiences that are happening here. And when this person's in life phase 40, I'm probably going to get along with them a lot better.
Yeah. No, I hear you, you know, but there's also like, I just have an immediate, like, I don't want my energy going to this person
Absolutely.
who's in like phase 10, you know?
Yes. And you don't need your energy to go into someone who's in phase 10. Yeah.
Did you grow up with, did you and your parents speak about reincarnation when you were a little kid?
No, I actually was raised Catholic, which is interesting. Not by my family, but I was put in the Catholic school system because when my parents immigrated to Canada, they were kind of brought up with this belief that the Catholic school system was better than the public school system because it receives both public as well as Catholic funding. So I don't know whether or not that is a true statement. It's just kind of what my parents had assumed was the truth when they immigrated to Canada. So they put me and my sister in the Catholic school system. And they were very hands-off with the way that they raised us in terms of religion. So we just grew up Catholic just because we were in the Catholic school system. And then I actually discovered Buddhism a few years ago when I was going through my own kind of healing journey with trauma. And it's something that has just been able to help me so much in terms of finding compassion for myself, finding compassion for other people, and then just to be able to build the skills to regulate as well. So that's more of a new life thing that has happened.
Is that a daily practice for you? Do you meditate daily?
I don't meditate daily, but I do have just kind of like daily reminders that are just kind of scattered within my daily life. So on my phone, I have statues of deities in my home, even though I don't necessarily practice in a theistic way. But it's just seeing the deities in my home reminds me of the practices of Buddhism that remind me to take it into how I'm interacting in the world and with other people. Mm-hmm. I still make mistakes. I'm still a douchebag sometimes.
I mean, I'd hope so, you know?
Yeah.
How boring would it be to be like perfect and enlightened all the time?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, if you do, then you're just not going to reincarnate because you've reached enlightenment.
What do you think happens after you've done reincarnating?
I don't know. It's a good question. I think you just find peace and then just wither away back into the world as like a tree or something, or grass, but in many different molecules.
In the course that I took last year, which I'm sure some of it maybe is based on some sort of like stolen Asian something, but you know, it was kind of mostly just sort of whitened. Mm-hmm. But the teacher spoke about how she would do these sessions with folks, and one time she entered a past life with somebody who was a tree branch laying on the forest floor for hundreds of years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's like, that's really cool. Interesting.
Yeah, that is really cool. Oh, hopefully no one ever stepped on that tree branch.
Or if they did, you know, it's a tree branch. It's like sturdy. It's fine.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I wonder, you know, it's like if you're a tree branch, how do you die? What happens?
I think you just slowly disintegrate. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of like nature's way of dying in your sleep, I suppose.
Yeah. It's quite a thought. Like it seems like a prison like thing to me, but maybe it is the epitome of enlightenment. You just get to be and nothing else.
You just be and nothing else, and then you get to just kind of soak in the nature as well. There was something I was thinking about, just in terms of just to circle back to the topic around cultural appropriation, was kind of, I'm curious just in terms of even your thoughts of, it's like artists versus clients and the choice to get a tattoo of a specific motif and the choice to tattoo in a specific style as well. And I almost feel like there's a bit more responsibility on the artist side, where even for myself, like, I don't mind seeing Asian style tattoos on non-Asian people, because I don't know that person's personal story. I don't know if they may have lived in Asia for a long time. They may have a lot of deep resonance with the culture for different reasons. But I think it's just, you know, you had kind of talked about power dynamics, and I think that's something that's really important, where when we enter into the industry as an artist and this becomes a job and there is a bit of transaction that's coming in and you are making a living from it, I think this is where it gets a little bit more nuanced and where that discussion needs to happen where, for myself is I would never tattoo Indigenous motifs because Indigenous people and artists are so oppressed in Canada already and probably in other parts of the world. So it's, I would not feel ethically right making a profit on something that comes from a culture where they're already being oppressed. And I think that's kind of a question that needs to happen with artists is, where does that exist within the environment that you live in? Because it's going to look different for every environment, right?
For sure. The context is going to be different. The types of people around you that are experiencing oppression are going to be different.
Exactly. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes as an artist, it's sometimes it's an easier choice to make, right? Like sometimes it's really clear, sometimes it's less clear. Somebody recently, a woman who was, I believe she's half Mexican, and she wanted those Mexican like flags, like they're cutout flags. And we talked about it some, and I was like, well, is there maybe a way you can get this from somebody who shares your heritage? And because she wanted to do I do a lot of abstract work, and that's kind of what a lot of people come to me for. And she was like, well, I want your abstract work, but I also want these flags. And, and I was like, I don't know, it's like, think about it. And she was like, oh, I'm going to Mexico. I'm going to go find somebody there to do this for me. And so she did. She went to Mexico and she got the flag part there, and then came back and had me do the abstract work. And that was kind of easy, right? Because she was like, let me think about it. I'm open to thinking about it. Oh, I'm going to go to Mexico. Like, I'll take this opportunity and I'll, go to the place where my ancestors are from and do this the way that it should be done. And somebody else, then I have a client who is Indigenous and Mexican. She's an older woman, not too much older, but she's middle-aged, and she has been coming to me for 16 years, and I'm the only person she's ever been tattooed by.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so she, we're working on kind of, first we had different pieces happening, and then we kind of started piecing them together into like more of a sleeve, and I doing some work on her chest, and kind of all over her body, right, over 16 years. And she wanted different, more culturally specific things, but she is so set on me, I wasn't going to be like, go find somebody else,
Yeah.
And so with her, and I'm like, okay, you're an Indigenous Mexican person. You are very aware of your own culture, your own self. Like, you're not ignorant. You're, you know what I mean? So, yeah. I totally agree with you. Like, white people should not profit from the art and culture of oppressed folks.
Yeah, and that's always an interesting one because I think it's this is a topic I've been thinking about a lot, is just like my space in just being a person of color. And for a long time I didn't even define myself as a person of color because I didn't feel like my experiences were racialized enough, as opposed to Black and Indigenous folks, especially in Canada as well, and the United States. And that's something that's, when I started reading more about the model minority myth and where it comes from, I started to deeply understand a little bit more of the experiences that Asian folks have. And now I do consider myself as a person of color. And I also understand that the model minority myth was purposely fabricated to drive a wedge between folks of various cultures that weren't white. And I think that's always something that's kind of interesting as well, is you do see a lot of folks who aren't of Asian heritage tattooing in Asian styles. And that's always like, it makes me a bit uncomfortable just because I feel like folks should choose to tattoo in other styles and not profit. But then I also understand that Asian folks, especially in westernized nations, often are in a socioeconomic privilege space. But then we have to dig deeper into it as well and understand, well, that comes from the immigration policies that exist that are only allowing folks of a certain socioeconomic class with educational background to be able to come to these countries as well. Whereas if you actually go to Asia, there's a lot of deep poverty that exists, and poverty that is, you can't even compare it to poverty in North America. So I think that's always kind of like a difficult one to be able to straddle. And I never want to tell artists what they can and cannot do, but I hope that artists will just kind of ask themselves a little bit more critical discourse of, why do I want to tattoo in this style? What does it mean to me? And, am I taking work from somebody where this motif actually means a lot more to them?
I mean, I wish, but the kind of majority of tattoo culture. Like if you're even like looking online at, I don't know, popular tattoo podcasts, right, run by big name dudes, and like the way they speak, they don't give a shit. They don't give a shit about anything but making money.
Yeah. I think it will change, hopefully. I'm hopeful.
I mean, it's changing in the sense that there's less of them and more of us, and I'm putting us in a category of like queer and not born with male privilege and not raised in specific places of privilege, of money and education. Like I'm an immigrant. I came here when I was 12 years old, you know, like, so us meaning people with different experiences other than straight male tattoo artists, mostly white.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're scared. You see them talking shit.
You see them talking
like
shit,
all these baby tattoo artists, like with their private studios, like the kind of the tropes that they've invented about how much like we suck and they roll, and how we don't deserve our clients, and our, you know, if we charge a higher rate than them, and like the reason I have to charge a higher rate than them is because, you know, I have more overhead because I'm spending money on a private studio, and I'm spending money on like snacks for my clients and blankets for my clients and all those kinds of things.
Yeah. I kind of see it as like they'll go the way of Blockbuster, where you either adapt because the world is adapting, or you will become Blockbuster.
You're talking about the business of Blockbuster that
Yes.
just died.
The actual business of Blockbuster.
Yeah.
I think there might be one still in existence in
I know,
the
it's like a
United
relic.
States. Yeah. I think they have a Twitter account still, something like that. Yeah.
How old are you?
I'm 37 myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would not have known at all. I would have been like, you could be 25. You
I
could
know.
be
I got those.
35.
I got the genetics that just don't age until I look 80.
amazing.
Yeah. I'll turn 80 and then I'll look 100.
And then you'll have the, you know, the trope of being very wise.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Some people will come to you and kiss your feet, and
Yeah. I will be the tree branch on the floor. Yeah.
That's next lifetime.
That is, yes. If I do well in this lifetime.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you feel as a queer person of color, newer to the tattoo culture? And also, like, I'm gonna assume that the Canadian scene is a little different from the scene here, and I don't know if that's true.
I
feel
don't
like
know. Yeah. I don't have enough experience outside of Canada, but I feel deeply supported in my locale, and I will identify, like, I live in Vancouver, which is, you know, one of Canada's larger cities. It is also West Coast, so it is also one of the more progressive cities. There's a very rich queer culture here. There's a lot of Asian folks on the West Coast as well, and a lot of Asian folks who are involved in a lot of critical discourse, and just being able to identify that, you know, Asian people's racialized experience does exist, and here is what it looks like. I feel really deeply supported just in terms of being like a person of color and also being a queer person, and I think it's like I'm lucky because I am in Vancouver, and that's where my career is starting right now, is that, you know, the next week I'm going to like a femme queer oriented space to shadow a tattoo artist, and
What's the space?
it's called the Northern Collective.
Okay. I'm always like thinking about places to go and guest.
You should definitely come up here and guest. We're in the same time zone, so you won't even have to worry about
I mean, I'm not
jet
even
lag.
worried about that. It's primarily, you know, I want to go places where I can find my people and
Right.
be comfortable and,
Yeah.
you know, just learn something from the folks around.
Yeah, Vancouver's really great. It's just I tattooed. I guested at one place in Toronto, which wasn't an amazing experience, and I think that was more just I, you know, was just looking for a place to be able to tattoo, and they had a bed that was available. It was within my price range to be able to rent, so I just kind of went for it, and it wasn't an amazing experience. It was an affirming experience of, these are the types of places I don't want to be involved in. This is the type of person I don't want to be as well. So I think just with every bad experience, there's always opportunities just to be able to affirm, I never want to show up like this because this is how it made me feel when this person showed up this way. But as far as I know, Toronto's got a fairly good, active queer scene as well in the tattoo industry. But in Vancouver, we have a lot of really, really great artists and a lot of great like Asian tattoo artists as well that are queer. So there's a couple of collectives that exist here that are specifically like queer Asian collectives, which is really cool.
And the collectives are members from different shops? Like, y'all just kind of hang out together? Like, it's a novel idea for me. I'm like, we don't have any fucking collectives. Like, people
Yeah,
here
it's more rent is really expensive here.
Yeah.
So people just kind of band together to, you know, you'll have like a private studio that is this many square feet, and then you'll just, as artists, you just kind of band together, be like, all right, we're going to share this space, share rent, and then share the beds as well. So myself, I share my private studio with another queer Asian artist as well, and we've known each other for many years. I reached out to her eons ago when she does hand poke tattoos, and then I was just starting to get interested in tattoos. We became friends, and then we just kind of started thinking about, hey, like our work ethic really aligns, our values really align, maybe we want to share an art studio together. And then one just kind of came up, so it was perfect. It almost felt really serendipitous. Mm-hmm. So I feel very lucky there. Yeah. And then we actually tattooed at it was called Another Gay Market. So that was just a few weeks ago. It was a completely like queer oriented market, and it was held at Sailor Circle, which is an Indigenous owned community venue. And that was really cool. So yeah, I don't know what the scene is like in Oakland, but we have like a very vibrant queer scene here. So you're always welcome to come and visit.
Yeah, I would love to do that. Yeah. I would love to do that. I will ask you later for like names and stuff to write down. Definitely. I was going to say, if you are interested in coming to the United States to guest, you could come to my space if you wanted to. The issue with my private studios, I don't have a huge following, and so I think it's harder for guest artists to get appointments because if you don't have a big following and you start to post, it's just not going to get as much reach. But I would be happy to make space for you if you wanted to come down here. But I was going to say, I guested at Butterfat Studios in Chicago last year.
Okay, Butterfat.
Very specifically because Estra Garcia, who owns it, is somebody I've been following since I was a baby tattoo artist. I think she's incredible, and she is really interested in how melanated skin interacts with color, and she does studies on that, and she experiments in very respectful ways, where she offers like other options besides like if someone has really dark skin, you can have red or green, that's it. Like she really just like takes a lot of time and energy to like explore, experiment, learn about pigment, about skin. She like blew my mind many times when I was there for the week. But her space, the space she owns, it's all women, and it's a private studio, and they have a following. So I got a lot of appointments just from posting, co-posting with their space. But she's brilliant, and her space is so beautiful and like lovely. I would recommend her.
I'll have to keep that in mind. I feel a little scared to go to the United States these days.
I understand.
Yes, but I will eventually come back.
Well,
you are always welcome here.
Thank you. I would like to.
I feel nervous to guest still at this stage in my career, but I know that I will get there eventually.
I mean, I feel nervous at this stage in my career, and I, the few times that I've approached shop owners, every time I send an email, I'll be like, I won't hear from them, or I'll hear from them and they'll be like, no.
Right.
Like I'm not good enough to be at their shop, and like literally every time they've been like, yeah, anytime. Like I don't think it's because of me. I think shop owners tend to, if they have the space, they tend to want guest artists to come through. Renée, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I feel like we could talk all day about these topics and other topics. I really appreciate your willingness, and I feel like we should have a follow-up.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on this, and just being someone in the industry that is having the discourse that needs to happen, and then creating a platform to be able to actually bring it out into the world. Because if the discourse is happening behind closed doors, sometimes it doesn't go anywhere and it doesn't make an impact in the industry. So I really appreciate just the work that you're doing, your energy, and just who you are as a person. Seems pretty rad.
Thank you. So I appreciate your appreciation. I feel like I have not heard a lot of people like say out loud that they clients, yes, but not other tattoo artists. And okay, so the last question for you for the episode is, what are some small things, a small thing or some small things that have been making you happy lately?
I think some small things has just been time with friends and slowing down enough to be able to actually really enjoy that time with friends. I think we live in a society that's so fast-paced that you'll be like, I have an hour for coffee, and then you're kind of running to the next appointment. Whereas when we're able to slow down, because as a baby tattoo artist, my books aren't like booked solid sort of thing. So it means that I've actually been able to slow down in life a little bit. I'm not as busy. I'm not working full time in the tech industry right now. And it's allowed me to just connect with my friends in a deeper and more meaningful manner, which has meant a lot to me.
That's making me happy to hear that you have been able to set up your life with some space in it without the detriment to your survival.
Yeah, I actually saw your Instagram post today in your story, and it's like, if we could all just work 15 hours a week, and then,
like, we really could.
Yeah, I was very much
not for a few billionaires.
Yeah, I was very much a thumbs upping that.